I want you to imagine just for a second that you are holding a golden ticket.
Oh, a golden ticket. I like the sound of that.
Right. And this isn't just, any ticket. This one allows you to take an investment you've made, let's say, an investment that has grown massively in value over the years,
Sure.
and you get to trade it in for a much bigger, much better investment.
Okay. Sounds great so far.
And the absolute best part of this transaction, you get to do this without paying a single dime in taxes on the gains right away.
Wow.
Yeah, you just seamlessly upgrade your portfolio and you keep all of your capital working for you, compounding year after year. When you hear it described like that, I mean, it sounds like absolute financial magic, doesn't it?
It really does. It
Yeah.
sounds exactly like one of those late night infomercials where you read the headline and your brain immediately goes, well, what is the catch here?
Exactly, like there has to be a catch.
Right. You think this has to be some sort of gray area accounting trick, but it's actually completely legal.
Yeah.
It is a foundational tool that is hard-coded directly into the tax system.
Yeah, exactly. It's Section 131 of the Internal Revenue Code. And today we are taking a deep dive into an incredibly comprehensive report. It's titled Inside 1031 Deal Flow.
Which is a fantastic resource, by the way.
It really is. This material features the insights of Michael Linton, who is a commercial real estate veteran with 39 years of experience.
39 years. That's incredible.
Yeah, that is almost 4 decades of watching investors either use this golden ticket flawlessly to build, massive generational wealth.
Or completely shred the ticket by making a tiny, entirely avoidable mistake.
Right, which is precisely why we are focusing on this specific report today.
Yeah, because the mission of this deep dive is not to get bogged down in the agonizing accounting math of a 1031 exchange.
Yeah.
We aren't going to be sitting here calculating depreciation recapture schedules or adjusting cost bases.
Nobody wants to do that kind of math on a Tuesday.
Exactly. For you, the listener, we are here to answer a foundational, deceptively simple question. Do you actually qualify?
Right, because the IRS acts like a very strict bouncer at an incredibly exclusive club.
That's a good way to put it.
We are going to decode exactly who gets past that bouncer, what types of properties actually make the cut, and the hidden, sometimes completely accidental traps that will get investors kicked out to the curb.
Yeah, the traps are where people really get hurt.
Okay, let's unpack this. A 1031 exchange is not some shady tax loophole that slipped past the government.
No, not at all.
It is a deliberate, highly structured wealth-building tool designed by Congress to keep investment capital moving in the economy. But, it requires a very specific key to unlock the door.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The government actually wants you to reinvest. But before we even look at the real estate itself, before we evaluate the bricks, the mortar, or the land, we have to look at the name on the deed.
The name on the deed.
Yeah. If this Section 1031 club is so exclusive, we have to ask, well, who actually gets in?
Based on how powerful the tax deferral is, you would instinctively think it's only for the mega rich, or for massive Wall Street firms with entire floors of lawyers.
Right. That's the assumption.
But the source material reveals that the IRS is surprisingly open-minded about who gets to play.
They really are. According to IRS Fact Sheet FS 2008-18, the net is cast intentionally, massively wide. The list of who qualifies includes everyday individuals, C corporations, S corporations, limited liability companies, trusts.
General partnerships, limited partnerships too, right?
Exactly. Essentially, any tax-paying entity can initiate a 1031 exchange.
I have to admit, that is genuinely surprising. I mean, the IRS is an agency that isn't exactly known for being easygoing or flexible.
Definitely not.
So why are they being so incredibly inclusive here? Why don't they care if I'm an individual or a massive C corporation?
Because Congress designed Section 1031 to be what they call entity neutral.
Entity neutral, okay.
Yeah, and the underlying logic is actually pretty straightforward. Congress realized that whether you hold the property in a family trust, a protective LLC, or just in your own personal name, the economic reality of the situation is exactly the same.
Meaning the money is still in the market.
Precisely. Your capital is still actively tied up in the real estate market.
Mm-hmm.
The IRS cares that the money is staying in the system and being put to productive use. They do not care about the legal acronym that comes after your name.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. They care about the capital, not the wrapper.
Right.
So let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the mechanics of this. It's almost like a relay race where anyone is allowed to run on the track. You can be an individual runner, or you can have an LLC team or a trust team.
I like that analogy.
But wait, what if my strategy changes mid-race? Like, if I start running the race as an individual holding a property, can I hand the baton to my own corporation to buy the next property?
What's fascinating here is that you've just hit on the exact trap that ruins so many exchanges for well-intentioned investors.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The answer to your relay race question is an absolute non-negotiable no. The IRS does not care what entity you use, but they demand absolute, rigorous consistency from start to finish. This is known in the tax world as the same taxpayer rule.
So, if I understand this correctly, the entity that finishes the race has to be...
The exact same entity that started it.
Wow, okay.
The exact taxpayer entity that sells the relinquished property, the building you are getting rid of, must be the exact same taxpayer entity that buys the replacement property. Let's say you own a duplex in your personal name.
Okay, personal name. Got it.
You decide to sell it, but, for liability protection on the new, bigger apartment building, you form a brand new LLC to make the purchase. Even if you are the 100% sole owner of that new LLC, the IRS views you, the individual, and your LLC as two completely different runners.
And if you pass the baton...
If you pass the baton, you drop the tax deferral.
Yeah.
You fail the exchange.
That is a fascinating distinction. So you could do the economics perfectly, but because you tried to upgrade your legal protection midstream, you suddenly owe massive capital gains taxes.
And this is exactly why Michael Linton issues such a strong warning in the source material. He stresses that proper title alignment must happen before the property is ever listed for sale. You cannot try to fix the ownership structure while you are in escrow.
Just to pause for a second for anyone who might not be deep into real estate terminology, when you say in escrow, you mean that period when the buyer and seller have agreed on a price, right?
Yeah.
And a neutral third party is just holding the funds and the paperwork waiting to close the deal.
Exactly. Escrow is the holding pen. If you wait until you are in that holding pen to realize your names don't match up, it is generally way too late to restructure your entities without triggering alarm bells at the IRS.
Right, because you're already halfway through the transaction.
Yeah, you have to audit your legal entities and make sure your starting runner and finishing runner match before you even call a real estate agent to list the property.
Okay, so if the IRS is willing to disqualify you over a minor legal name change from an individual to an LLC, it stands to reason they must be absolutely ruthless about the actual physical buildings you're allowed to trade, right?
I think so.
Yeah, like if the who has to stay perfectly consistent, you might assume the what also has to stay perfectly consistent. If I sell a duplex, I must have to buy a duplex.
That is the logical assumption to make. But the source material reveals that the reality is the exact opposite.
Wait, really?
Yes. The rigid strictness we just talked about regarding the legal entity, it completely vanishes when it comes to the physical property itself. IRS Publication 544 outlines the core standard. The property must simply be held for investment or for productive use in a trade or business. That is the overarching umbrella rule.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the definition of like-kind property, especially after the major tax law changes in 2017 that restricted 1031s solely to real estate, is unbelievably broad.
So broad.
The phrase like-kind does not mean identical. As you said, it doesn't mean swapping a residential rental for another residential rental. According to the report, you can take a single-family rental house and trade it for a retail strip center.
Yes, you can.
Or, incredibly, you can swap a hotel for a self-storage facility.
Or you could trade a plot of vacant land for a commercial office building. You could trade an industrial warehouse for an apartment complex. I mean, the sheer variety of combinations is staggering.
It's like you're allowed to trade apples for oranges as long as the IRS agrees that both of them are, I don't know, business fruit?
Business fruit, that's a great way to think of it.
Right. As long as they're both held for investment or business use, you have the freedom to completely pivot your entire asset class.
Right.
You could theoretically go from managing 20 residential tenants with plug toilets to just owning the raw land underneath the cell tower.
Exactly.
That is a massive lifestyle and portfolio shift, entirely tax deferred.
It is a phenomenal tool for repositioning wealth as your life goals change. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to remember why the government allows this.
To keep the money in the economy.
Right, they want to stimulate the domestic economy. So while the type of property is incredibly flexible, the geography is absolutely rigid.
Oh, geography.
Yes, there is a hard border, quite literally. The U.S. only rule. Both the property you sell and the property you buy must be located within the borders of the United States.
I see. Because the whole point of the entity neutral rule earlier was keeping capital in the system. The IRS doesn't want that capital flowing out of the U.S. economy.
Exactly.
So if I sell my apartment building in Florida, I can't 1031 exchange that money into a beautiful beachfront resort in Mexico, even if I'm running that resort purely as a business and never sleep there myself.
Correct. The IRS stops at the border. You cannot exchange domestic property for foreign property, and conversely, you cannot exchange foreign property for domestic property under Section 1031. It is a hard, non-negotiable stop.
Wow. Okay.
You can trade a warehouse in Ohio for a working farm in Texas, but you cannot cross an international line.
All right. So let's put the pieces together so far. You are following the rules. You have your matching entities perfectly aligned, so the same taxpayer rule is satisfied. You're swapping a U.S. hotel for a U.S. warehouse, so you're safely within the geographic borders and meeting the business fruit standard.
Right. So far, so good.
You're completely safe, right? Well, what if you decide you want to trade your commercial rental property for a gorgeous beach house? This is where we hit the hidden IRS tripwires.
This is where things get highly scrutinized, because the IRS draws a very dark, thick line between a genuine investment and personal use. Primary residences, the actual home where you live, get your mail, and sleep most nights, are entirely 100% disqualified from a 1031 exchange.
But what if it's not a primary residence? What if the second home?
That's where it gets tricky.
Let's say I buy that beach house, and I really do rent it out most of the year to generate income. It's on a vacation rental platform. It's making real money. But, I own it. I want to take my family there, so what's the limit?
Right.
Can I just say I was down there maintaining the property while sitting on the beach for a month in the summer? Do I blow up my tax deferral if I use it myself?
For a long time, that exact question was a massive point of anxiety and litigation for investors. People were constantly trying to game the system with maintenance tricks.
I'm sure they were.
But to clear up the confusion, the IRS provided a very specific roadmap called Revenue Procedure 2008-16. This is known in the industry as a safe harbor. It basically says to the investor, if you follow these exact mathematical rules, we guarantee we won't challenge your 1031 exchange.
Okay, let's look at the math on this safe harbor. How does it actually work in practice?
To qualify a vacation home or a second home as a legitimate investment property, you must have held it for at least 24 months.
2 years. Okay.
During each of those two 12-month periods, you must rent the property out at a fair market value for a minimum of 14 days. You can't just rent it to your brother for $1 a day. It has to be a real market rate rental.
That part seems easy enough. 2 weeks of renting it out a year.
Yes, but here is the critical part, the part that actually trips people up. Your personal use of the property is strictly mathematically limited.
How limited?
During those same 12-month periods, your personal use cannot exceed 14 days, or 10% of the days it was actually rented out, whichever of those two numbers is less.
Let's slow down and really think about what that math means for you as an investor. It is incredibly precise. Let's say you successfully rent the beach house out for 100 days a year.
Okay.
10% of 100 rented days is 10 days. The rule says your limit is the lesser of 14 days, or 10%. Since 10 is less than 14, your absolute limit for personal use is 10 days.
Exactly right.
If you go down there to fix the roof, decide the weather is beautiful, and stay an 11th day just to enjoy the beach with your family, your entire multi-million-dollar investment instantly transforms into a disqualified personal asset in the eyes of the IRS.
Yes. The tax shield dissolves and the bill comes due. The reason the IRS is so unbelievably strict here is to prevent wealthy taxpayers from using a 1031 exchange to essentially buy themselves a tax-free personal vacation home.
Because it's supposed to be an investment.
Exactly. Because the margins are so tight, it requires meticulous record keeping. You have to log every single day it was rented to a third party, every single day you or your family used it personally, and you have to have the receipts to prove you were charging fair market rent.
So the vacation home trap is really about accidentally having too much fun with your asset. You treat it a little too much like a personal toy, and it loses its professional investment status.
It's a good summary.
But what if your problem is the exact opposite? What if you aren't vacationing at all? What if you were doing strictly business, working around the clock, aggressively flipping houses? You buy distressed properties, renovate them, and sell them 3 months later for a profit.
Then you've just walked right into what the industry calls the dealer trap. And according to the source material, this is arguably the most commercially dangerous disqualification for active real estate professionals.
Really?
Yeah. Under IRS Publication 544, properties that are held primarily for sale are explicitly excluded from like-kind exchange treatment.
Wait, so if I'm doing quick flips to make money in real estate, the IRS doesn't even view those houses as real estate investments.
No, they don't. They view those houses as dealer inventory. You are acting as a dealer of real estate in the exact same way a car dealer sells cars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a Ford dealership isn't holding F-150s on the lot as long-term wealth investments, right? They are holding them primarily to sell them to customers as fast as possible to generate ordinary income.
That makes total sense. I like to compare this to owning a grocery store. If you own the local grocery store, the apples sitting in the produce aisle, those are your inventory.
Right.
You are holding them primarily for sale. You want them gone by tomorrow. But the actual brick and mortar building that houses the grocery store, that is your investment. It's generating value over a long period of time.
Yes, exactly.
If you treat residential houses like apples on a shelf, flipping them as fast as you can, the IRS takes away your 1031 privileges for those properties because they are inventory, not investments.
That is a great analogy. And to take your grocery store analogy a step further, if you took those same apples and somehow put them in a climate-controlled vault for 2 years to let them appreciate in value, the IRS might start treating them like an investment.
Oh, interesting.
It's entirely about how you treat the asset on a daily basis. And Michael Linton warns that this specific rule catches highly sophisticated investors off guard all the time.
Why is that? If they are sophisticated, shouldn't they know the difference between an apple and a building?
Because in the real world, many active real estate professionals do both. They wear multiple hats. They might have a portfolio of apartment buildings that they hold long-term for retirement wealth, but to generate immediate cash flow to pay their staff and keep the lights on, they also aggressively flip 5 or 6 houses a year.
Ah, I see where this is going. They mix the two activities.
Precisely. If you do both of those activities within the exact same business structure, let's say the same LLC, using the same bank accounts and the same accounting software, you risk what is called contaminating your entire portfolio.
Contaminating it.
Yeah, the IRS might look at your single LLC, see the high volume of house flipping, and decide to characterize the entire entity as a dealer. Suddenly, even your long-term buy-and-hold apartment buildings lose their 1031 eligibility because the entity holding them has been branded a dealer.
That is wild. You contaminate the good long-term assets by letting them touch the short-term inventory assets. So, practically speaking, how does an investor who does both actually fix this?
The only viable solution is rigorous, uncompromising entity separation. Your long-term investment properties must be held in entirely distinct LLCs from your flipping business.
Totally separate.
You need completely separate financial records, totally different bank accounts, and distinct management. You have to build a complete legal and financial firewall between the apples on the shelf and the building itself.
Okay, so whether we are talking about the vacation home safe harbor or the flipper contamination trap, every single rule we've discussed so far really hinges on one invisible overarching concept: intent.
Yes, intent is everything.
Did you intend to hold it for investment, or did you intend to go on vacation? Did you intend to hold it long term, or did you intend to flip it like inventory? But, the IRS doesn't have a telepathy department.
Thankfully.
Right. They can't read your mind to know what you were thinking when you bought the property, so how do they actually measure intent?
They look for documented proof in the real world. The legal standard they apply is called the totality of the circumstances. They look at the holding period. Most tax advisors, including Michael Linton, strongly recommend holding a property for at least 1 full year, but ideally 2 years, to firmly establish that long-term investment intent.
Okay, so time is a factor.
Yes, and they also look at the paper trail.
What kind of paper trail?
Did the property generate actual rental income? Did you file a Schedule E on your tax returns?
And just for clarity, a Schedule E is the specific supplemental tax form where you report income or loss from rental real estate, right?
Exactly. Filing a Schedule E is a massive green flag for the IRS that you are operating a legitimate rental property. They also look at your behavior. Did you list the property for sale immediately after buying it, or did you try to find a tenant?
So what does this all mean? Let's ground this theory in reality for a second. How does the IRS actually judge two people who might look quite similar on paper?
The source material provides a perfect, practical case scenario set in Florida to illustrate this exact point. Let's look at Investor A and Investor B.
Okay, Investor A.
Investor A bought a single-family home in Tampa 3 years ago. They have rented it out continuously to a long-term tenant. They've charged market rates, and every single year, they've filed that Schedule E on their tax returns to report the rental income and deduct the expenses. Now, after 3 years, they want to sell it to buy a larger multifamily property.
That is a textbook pass. Clear qualification. The intent is obvious, documented, and proven through their behavior over a multi-year timeline.
Right. Now consider investor B. They bought a very similar property in St. Petersburg, just across the bay, but they only bought it 8 months ago.
Oh, 8 months.
Yeah, they never put a tenant in it. They never filed a Schedule E. Instead, they used it as a personal weekend retreat. But then the local real estate market spiked, values shot up, and they immediately called a broker and listed it for sale to capture that fast equity.
Total disqualification. Even though it's technically a real estate asset, it functioned as a personal vacation home. The holding period was less than a year, and the quick opportunistic sale screams flipper or dealer intent, not long-term investment.
Exactly. The difference between these two investors isn't the physical type of property. It isn't the dollar amount, and it isn't the geographic market. It is entirely about intent and use.
Which brings us back to documentation.
And this leads to Michael Linton's final, perhaps most important warning in the report. Intent must be documented, consistent, and evident in your operating history long before you ever sit down with a qualified intermediary to start your exchange.
A qualified intermediary, that's the mandatory, legally required middleman who holds your money during the 1031 trade so you never actually touch the cash yourself, correct?
That's right. If you touch the money, the exchange is void.
Instant failure.
Yeah, the QI handles the funds. But Linton's point is that you cannot reverse engineer your intent after you've already decided to sell. You can't sit down with your QI and suddenly pretend you are a long-term investor if your paper trail says you were a flipper.
You have to build the paper trail from day one. So let's summarize this journey we've been on. The 1031 Exclusive Club is actually quite welcoming when it comes to legal entities. You can be an individual, an LLC, or a trust, because they care about the economics, not the name.
Right.
But you must obey the incredibly strict same taxpayer rule, no passing the baton to a different entity in escrow. The property types themselves are incredibly flexible. You can swap that hotel for a self-storage facility all day long because they are both business fruit, but you are trapped within the hard borders of the United States.
Perfectly stated.
And above all else, you have to establish and document your pure investment intent to avoid triggering the personal use tripwires or falling into the house flipper inventory trap.
That is an excellent summary.
Yeah.
If you can navigate those pillars, you have the key to the club.
And to you, the listener, the biggest takeaway here is this. Assuming that you qualify for a 1031 exchange simply because you happen to hold a deed to some real estate is the most expensive mistake you can possibly make. You have to pass the bouncer's checklist first, and you have to plan for it years in advance.
This raises an important question, though. Something for you to mull over as we wrap up. We've established today that the IRS relies heavily on holding periods and meticulous documentation to prove your intent at the exact moment you acquired the property.
Right.
But what happens when the unpredictable chaos of life intervenes? What if you genuinely buy a commercial property with a rock-solid, fully documented 10-year investment plan, but then a severe personal crisis, a sudden medical emergency, an unexpected divorce, a catastrophic financial shift in your family forces you to sell that property after just 6 months? How does a rigid, mathematically inflexible tax code differentiate between a disguised quick flip and a genuine, unavoidable change in human circumstances? It's a fascinating gray area of tax law, and it's exactly where the rigid theory of intent collides with the messy reality of life.
It really is, because at the end of the day, that golden ticket to tax-free portfolio upgrades is incredibly powerful, but it comes with strings attached. You just have to know exactly how to untangle them.